The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No slammed doors. It was a single sentence, said quietly, over coffee, like it didn't have the power to rearrange my entire life. "You're not listed anymore," my mother said, eyes fixed on her mug. It just made more sense this way. My name is Rachel Whitmore. I was 34 years old at the time, living in Denver, working as a senior project manager for a mid-sized logistics company. I paid my own mortgage, my own insurance, my own mistakes. I hadn't asked my parents for money in over a decade, and yet, in that moment, I felt like a child again. Not because I needed them, but because they had decided something for me, without me. We were sitting at the kitchen island in my parents' house in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The house I grew up in. The house my grandmother had left behind when she passed away 6 years earlier. The house everyone referred to as the family home, even though it had been quietly transferred into my parents' names the year after her funeral. I was in town because my younger brother Caleb was getting married in 3 months. My mother had asked me to come early, said she needed help organizing paperwork. She always framed things like favors, never requests. I should have known. "What do you mean not listed?" I asked. My father, George Whitmore, sat at the other end of the island, pretending to read emails on his tablet. He hadn't looked up once since I arrived. My mother, Elaine, sighed like I was being slow on purpose. "The will. We updated it last year." "And?" I said. "And it only names Caleb now," she replied. "You're doing well, Rachel. You don't need all this responsibility." Responsibility. That was the word they used when they wanted to make control sound generous. I didn't speak right away. I picked up my coffee, took a sip, and set it down carefully. I noticed my hand was steady. That surprised me. "So I'm excluded," I said. Elaine winced. "That sounds so harsh." "It's accurate," I replied. She reached for my arm, then stopped herself. "Honey, this isn't about punishment. It's about practicality. Caleb is staying here. He's taking over things." "Things," I repeated. "The house." The small rental properties my grandmother had owned. The family landscaping company my father still insisted on calling a hobby, even though it paid most of their bills. All of it. My father cleared his throat, but still didn't look at me. "You left," he said. "That's not an accusation. It's just what happened." I finally looked at him. "I moved for work." "You moved for independence," my mother corrected. "And that's fine. We're proud of you. But Caleb needs roots." There it was, the narrative they'd rehearsed. I was self-sufficient, therefore optional. My brother was dependent, therefore protected. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked. Elaine's mouth tightened. "We just did." "No," I said. "You planned this. I was invited here to hear it." My father finally looked up. His expression was tired, not guilty. "We didn't want to make a big deal out of it." I almost laughed. This wasn't a big deal to them because they'd never been on the receiving end of a decision like this. They had always been the ones deciding. I stood up slowly. "I need to understand something," I said. "Am I removed completely, or just from the property?" Elaine hesitated, a fraction of a second too long. "Completely," she said. The word landed heavier than the sentence. I nodded once. Okay, calm. Too calm, maybe. But inside, something had shifted. Not broken. Clicked. "What about the company?" I asked. My father answered that one. "Caleb's name is on the operating agreement now." "Is mine?" I asked. He hesitated this time. "Not as an owner." "But," I said. "But you're still listed on the personal guarantee," he admitted. I felt the air change. The landscaping company had taken out a loan 2 years earlier to expand equipment and vehicles. At the time, my father had asked me to co-sign temporarily. He'd said it was just to help them get a better rate. He'd said they'd refinance later. They hadn't. "So I carry the risk," I said quietly, "but not the benefit." Elaine frowned. "That's not how we see it." "It's how the bank sees it," I replied. Silence filled the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked somewhere behind me. "You didn't think to mention this earlier?" I asked. My mother crossed her arms. "We didn't think you'd react like this." There it was again. My reaction was the problem, not the decision. I grabbed my bag from the chair. "I need some air," I said. Elaine stood. "Don't be dramatic." I turned back to her. I'm being precise. Outside, the Tennessee air was thick and warm. I stood in the driveway and stared at the house I'd once believed was mine too, at least in spirit. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to see. Love in my family had always come with conditions: proximity, compliance, silence. I had broken all three, and now they were adjusting the paperwork to match. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother. Mom says you're upset. We'll talk later. Later. That was always the word people used when they wanted time to control the story. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away. As I drove, I didn't feel angry yet. I felt alert, and that was far more dangerous for them. Because I wasn't going to argue, I was going to look at documents. And once I understood exactly what they'd done, I would decide what to do next. They thought they'd quietly removed me from the future. They didn't realize they'd just given me clarity. And clarity changes everything. I didn't go back to my parents' house that night. I checked into a hotel off the highway, the kind with beige walls and impersonal art, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without turning on the television. I wasn't upset in the way people expect. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was replaying details. My mother's wording. My father's hesitation. The way they'd both avoided the word inheritance, but had no problem using responsibility. The way my brother's name had come up again and again, as if repeating it made the decision morally sound. By midnight, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't sudden. This had been in motion for years. The next morning, I drove past the landscaping company on my way out of town. Whitmore Grounds and Design, my father's pride, my grandmother's seed money, my brother's future, apparently. The trucks were parked in a neat row, newer than I remembered. The logo freshly repainted. Expansion costs money. I stopped at a gas station, bought coffee I didn't need, and opened my laptop in the car. The first thing I searched wasn't inheritance law. It was my credit report. I hadn't checked it in months. No reason to. I paid my bills. I didn't gamble. I didn't co-sign for anyone except that one time 2 years ago, when my father had said it was temporary. The report loaded slowly. 2 hard inquiries stared back at me, one from the original lender, another from a regional bank I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened, but my thoughts stayed calm. They were shopping the loan. Without telling me, I drove the rest of the way back to Denver on autopilot. By the time I got home, my anger had crystallized into something cleaner: resolve. I emailed a lawyer that afternoon, not a family friend, not someone my parents might recognize. A woman named Denise Harper, who specialized in commercial liability and contract disentanglement. Her assistant replied within an hour. Consultation available Thursday at 10 a.m. I accepted immediately. In the meantime, my family filled the silence, exactly the way I expected. My mother texted me photos of wedding centerpieces, asked if I could help pay for a florist upgrade, since you're so good with money. I didn't respond. My father left a voicemail. Calm. Reasonable. He said we should talk like adults. I deleted it. Caleb sent a single text. Didn't know about the loan stuff. Dad said you'd understand. That one stayed with me longer than the rest. Not because it hurt more, because it confirmed something I'd been avoiding. They were comfortable letting him believe whatever version kept him aligned with them. I arrived at Denise Harper's office early on Thursday. She was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed and direct. The kind of woman who didn't soften her language unless it served a purpose. She listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. The will, the exclusion, the guarantee, the new inquiries. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Your parents made a strategic error, she said. I waited. They isolated you from assets that kept you attached to liability, she continued. That's not accidental. It's leverage. Is it legal? I asked. She nodded. Unfortunately, yes. At least, how it stands now. What are my options? I asked. She folded her hands. You can demand release. You can force refinancing without you. Or you can preemptively withdraw consent, which would trigger a review. And the fallout? I asked. She smiled slightly. That depends on how fragile the business actually is. That was the first moment I felt something close to satisfaction, not revenge. Information. I don't want to hurt anyone, I said. I just want to stop being exposed. Denise nodded. Those goals aren't mutually exclusive, but I'll be honest with you. People who benefit from your silence rarely respond well when you stop providing it. I left her office with a checklist and a clear directive. Do nothing publicly. Request, and above all, don't warn them. That afternoon, I emailed my father. Short, neutral, precise. Please send me copies of all loan documents where my name appears, including any recent applications or inquiries. He replied an hour later. Why are you making this adversarial? I stared at the screen. That word again. Adversarial. I typed back. I'm making it accurate. His response didn't come until the next day. We'll gather the paperwork. They sent it the following Monday. Not everything, but enough. The expansion loan had been restructured once already. Quietly. My name still attached. The new bank inquiry was for a line of credit they were hoping to use to cover cash flow gaps during the winter. Winter was their slow season. They were planning to ride it out. On my back. That night, my mother called. I answered. You're scaring your father, she said without greeting. I didn't raise his debt, I replied. She sighed. Why are you doing this now? I paused. Because now I know, I said. She lowered her voice. Rachel, families help each other. Yes, I said. And families don't remove one member from security while keeping them on the hook. She was quiet. We never meant to hurt you, she said finally. I know, I replied. You just didn't mean to protect me either. She hung up. 2 days later, Denise filed the notice. Withdrawal of consent. Formal demand for release. Deadline included. No accusations, no emotion, just facts. The bank acknowledged receipt within 24 hours. My parents did not. But silence doesn't mean inaction. It means scrambling. And I could feel it starting. They thought the will conversation had been the end. They had no idea it was the beginning. Because the moment I stopped trying to be fair, I started being free. And that scared them far more than anger ever could. The first sign that the letter had landed exactly where it was supposed to came 3 days later. My credit monitoring app sent me an alert. Another soft inquiry. Same regional bank, different loan officer. I stared at the notification for a long moment, then set my phone down without opening it. Denise had warned me this would happen. When people lose quiet access to you, they start testing doors to see which ones are still unlocked. I didn't call the bank. I didn't call my parents. I let them move. That weekend, my mother hosted a family dinner. I knew because she posted photos online. Roast chicken, matching place settings, a carefully cropped shot of Caleb and his fiancée Lauren, smiling at the table like nothing in the world was wrong. I wasn't invited. That wasn't new. What was new was the caption. Family is everything. I didn't react. I didn't block her. I didn't comment. I took screenshots. Monday morning, Denise forwarded me an email from the lender. They had contacted Whitmore Grounds and Design, requesting updated financials. The notice I'd filed had triggered a review. This is where things get uncomfortable, Denise wrote. For them, she was right. By Tuesday afternoon, my father called. Not my mother. Not Caleb. Him. I answered on the third ring. Rachel, he said, his voice low, controlled. We need to talk. I'm listening, I replied. You blindsided us, he said. No, I said. I documented myself. He exhaled sharply. This could ruin us. That depends on your numbers, I replied. He paused. You don't understand how thin margins are right now. I understand exactly, I said. That's why I shouldn't be carrying risk without ownership. His tone shifted. Softer. Familiar. We raised you better than this. There it was. The moral framing. I didn't change, I said. The paperwork did. You're acting like an outsider, he snapped. I was made one, I replied. Silence stretched between us. I imagined him standing in his office, surrounded by equipment catalogs and framed photos of my grandmother, trying to reconcile the version of me he'd relied on with the one speaking now. What do you want? He asked, finally. It was the first time he'd asked that without accusation. I want my name off every guarantee, I said. Immediately. And then what? He asked. Then I step away, I said. Completely. He scoffed. You think that solves everything? No, I said. I think it stops one thing from becoming everything. He didn't answer. That night, Caleb texted me. Dad says you're threatening the company. Is that true? I stared at the message. This was the part that hurt, if anything did. Not because he doubted me, because he hadn't asked before believing them. I typed carefully. I'm protecting myself. Ask him why my name is still on the loan. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. He didn't respond. 2 days later, Denise called. They're asking for time, she said. To do what? I asked. Refinance, she replied. Without you. That's what I want, I said. Yes, she agreed. But they're also asking the bank to delay enforcement. And the bank, I asked, isn't inclined, she said, because now they see risk. I leaned back in my chair. The thing my parents had always feared most wasn't failure, it was exposure. Friday evening, my mother showed up at my house. No warning. I saw her car from the window and felt nothing but mild annoyance. That told me everything about how far I'd already moved. I opened the door and stayed in the frame. We need to talk, she said. We already are, I replied. She stepped inside anyway, looking around like she was cataloging evidence of my independence. The clean counters, the art on the walls, the quiet. You've changed, she said. I stopped managing your feelings, I replied. Her eyes flashed. You're tearing this family apart. I met her gaze. No, I'm refusing to be used as reinforcement. She crossed her arms. You know Caleb can't carry this alone. That's a decision you made, I said. Not me. She shook her head. You always think in terms of contracts. I had to, I replied. You taught me love was conditional. Her face hardened. If you do this, don't expect forgiveness. I nodded once. I'm not asking for it. She stood there for a long moment, clearly waiting for something. An apology, a retreat. It didn't come. She left without another word. That night, Denise emailed me again. They're trying to use the house as collateral. My pulse finally ticked up. The house? I replied. Yes, she wrote. But there's a complication. There always was. The house still carried a partial interest tied to my grandmother's estate. Not enough to give me ownership, but enough to slow any clean transaction. Enough to force disclosure. Enough to ask questions they didn't want asked. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to anticipation. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because the truth had started moving without my help. And once truth starts moving, control slips fast. They had removed my name from the future they wanted. They hadn't realized they'd anchored me to their past. And the past, when examined closely, has a way of undoing people who thought it was settled. I went to bed knowing one thing. They were running out of options, and I was done providing them. I learned about the title problem before my parents did. Denise called early the next morning, her voice measured but alert. I pulled the full property history on the Oak Ridge house, she said. It's messier than they remember. Messy how? I asked. The deed was transferred after your grandmother's death, but the estate wasn't fully closed, she replied. There's a residual interest tied to a promissory note your grandmother extended to your father years ago. It was informal, but it's documented. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the grain in the wood. So the house isn't entirely theirs. Not in the way banks like, Denise said. Any attempt to leverage it will trigger review, and once reviewed, questions will follow. Questions were dangerous to people who relied on silence. By noon, my father knew. He called twice. I didn't answer. He texted once. Please call me. I didn't. This wasn't punishment. It was strategy. Denise had been clear. Let them speak to institutions. Institutions don't care about tone or intention. They care about paper. That afternoon, Caleb finally called. Rachel, he said, skipping any greeting. What's going on with the house? What did Dad tell you? I asked. That it's complicated, he said. That you're making it harder than it needs to be. I closed my eyes briefly. I'm not making it anything, I said. I'm responding to what already exists. You could just trust them, he insisted. I did, I said. That's how my name ended up on a loan I don't benefit from. He was quiet. You never wanted the business, he said finally. That's not the point, I replied. I wanted choice. He sighed. Mom's not sleeping. That's not on me, I said. He lowered his voice. She says you're trying to take the house. I laughed once. Not out loud, just enough to be heard. I'm not taking anything. I'm stepping out. That doesn't feel the same from here, he said. I know, I replied, because you've never been on the other side. He didn't respond. 2 days later, Denise forwarded me a notice from the bank. Collateral, under review. Additional disclosures required. They were circling now. Carefully, slowly. The way sharks do when they sense blood, but haven't decided how to bite. Friday evening, my parents requested a meeting. Neutral ground, my father wrote. Just to talk. I agreed, with conditions. Denise would be present, everything documented. We met in a conference room at a local mediation office. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, a long table that made everyone sit too far apart. My parents arrived together. My mother's posture was rigid. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Not weak, just diminished by the situation he couldn't command. Caleb came alone. He avoided my eyes. Denise opened with formalities, then invited my father to speak. This has gotten out of hand, he said. We didn't expect legal pressure. You created legal exposure, Denise replied calmly. Pressure follows. My mother leaned forward. Rachel could have come to us. I did, I said. Years ago. You told me not to worry. She looked at me sharply. Because we didn't want you to. That doesn't negate reality, Denise said. My father rubbed his temples. The bank won't move forward unless the title is clean. And it isn't, Denise said. Because the estate wasn't fully resolved. Caleb looked between us. So what does that mean? It means, Denise said, that leveraging the house opens questions about past transactions. My mother stiffened. Are you threatening us? No, Denise said. We're explaining risk. My father turned to me. What do you want, Rachel? I met his gaze. The same thing I've said from the start. My name off all guarantees. No future exposure. And the house? He asked. I don't want it, I said. But I won't be used to protect it either. My mother shook her head. You're forcing us into a corner. I said nothing. Caleb finally spoke. If the business collapses. That's not on Rachel, Denise interrupted. It's on whoever structured it this way. The room went quiet. My father exhaled. We need time. You have a deadline, Denise replied. From the bank, my mother's voice cracked. We did everything for this family. I looked at her then. Really looked. The fear behind her anger. The loss of control she'd never learned to tolerate. You did what worked for you, I said quietly. Not for everyone. She flinched. The meeting ended without resolution. But something had shifted. On Monday, the bank sent a formal notice. Refinance or release the guarantor within 10 business days. 10 days. That was the number. My parents called daily after that. Sometimes together, sometimes separately, sometimes through Caleb. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry. Because I had already said everything that mattered. On the 8th day, Denise called me. They're preparing to sign, she said. But they want something. What? I asked. A statement, she replied. That this was mutual. Amicable, I smiled faintly. No, she laughed softly. I thought you'd say that. They can have my silence, I said. Not my revision. The documents arrived the next morning. Release of guarantee. Full. Final. Notarized. I signed. Just like that. No speech. No confrontation. No forgiveness ceremony. Denise filed them by noon. By evening, my phone was quiet. For the first time in weeks, truly quiet. I sat alone in my living room and felt the weight lift. Not the sadness. That would come later. But the pressure. The constant low-grade awareness that I was carrying something that wasn't mine. They still had the house, the business, each other. I had my autonomy. And once you reclaim that, you stop bargaining with people who only valued you when you were useful. I went to bed knowing the next move wouldn't be mine. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The silence after the release papers were filed lasted exactly 4 days. On the 5th day, my mother called. I didn't answer. An hour later, my father emailed Denise, not me. The subject line was short. Next steps. Denise forwarded it with a single comment. They're regrouping. That was the thing about my parents. They didn't rage when something slipped out of their hands. They reorganized. They reframed. They searched for a way to restore balance in their favor. Control, once tasted, becomes a habit. I went back to my routines. Work, gym, groceries, life without the constant background hum of someone else's expectations. I noticed how much lighter my thoughts felt, how decisions no longer came with an internal checklist of how they would land back home in Oak Ridge. On Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite. Christmas planning call, sent by my mother. No message, no explanation. Just an assumption. I declined it. 10 minutes later, Caleb called. Mom's upset, he said. I'm sure, I replied. She thinks you're freezing her out. I'm setting boundaries, I said. There's a difference. He hesitated. She doesn't see it that way. I know, I said. She never has. He exhaled. Look, things are tense here. The bank's watching. Vendors are nervous. Dad's trying to keep everyone calm. That's not my role, I said. I know, he said quickly. I'm just saying, this is bad timing. I leaned against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes. It's not bad timing. It's accurate timing. He didn't answer. That weekend, I received a certified letter from the company's attorney. Not a threat, not an accusation, a notice. They were amending the operating agreement, removing my name entirely. No ownership, no liability, no mention. I read it twice, then once more. They were closing the loop, not out of respect, out of necessity. I forwarded it to Denise. Her reply came back almost immediately. As expected, they're isolating risk. Good. On Sunday evening, my mother sent a text. I don't recognize this version of you. I stared at it for a long moment before typing back. This is who I've always been. You just didn't need to see it before. She didn't reply. The following week brought news from an unexpected source. Lauren, my brother's fiancé, called me. We'd never been close. Polite, cordial, but not intimate. She was careful around my family, in the way people are when they sense rules they don't fully understand. Rachel, she said, I hope this isn't weird. It's fine, I replied. She hesitated. I just wanted you to know, not everything you're hearing is true. I waited. Your parents are telling people you walked away because you're too focused on your career, she continued, that you didn't want to be tied down by family obligations. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not pain. Recognition. And you? I asked. She paused. I think they needed a story where they weren't responsible. I smiled faintly. That's perceptive. She lowered her voice. Caleb doesn't know how to push back. He's always been rewarded for agreeing. That landed. He's scared, she added. Not of losing the business, of losing them. I know, I said. There was a pause. Then, I'm glad you did what you did. Thank you, I said, and meant it. 2 days later, Denise called. The bank approved a short-term extension, she said. They're restructuring internally. Without you. That's what I wanted, I replied. Yes, she said, but understand this. They'll frame this as your choice to leave, not their choice to exclude. I'm okay with that, I said. She chuckled softly. Most people aren't. I am, I said, because I know the truth. Thanksgiving passed without contact. Christmas followed. I spent it in Denver, quiet and intentional. No forced traditions, no walking on eggshells. I cooked for myself, took a long walk, watched the city lights come on. For the first time, the holidays didn't feel like a performance review. In early January, the business officially downsized. 2 trucks sold, equipment leased instead of owned. The expansion quietly reversed. No announcements, no apologies, just contraction. My father emailed me once that month. I hope you're well. Nothing else. I replied 2 days later. I am. That was all. Not because I didn't care, because caring didn't mean sacrificing myself anymore. The final confirmation came in February. A notice from the county. The house title had been updated. Estate issues resolved. Clean at last. My parents had gotten what they wanted. Stability at a cost, and I had gotten what I needed. Distance without guilt. That was the moment I realized something important. Revenge isn't loud. It does. Sometimes it's simply stepping aside and letting people live inside the systems they built for others. They had structured their world around the assumption that I would absorb pressure quietly. When I stopped, the structure held, barely, and that was never my responsibility. By the time spring arrived, I wasn't watching anymore. I had stopped measuring my life against theirs. The power dynamic they'd relied on had dissolved, not because I fought it, but because I withdrew from it completely. And once you do that, there's no going back. For them, or for you. The thick paper, embossed lettering, carefully chosen font. The kind of wedding invitation designed to signal stability, tradition, and family unity. Caleb and Lauren Whitmore request the pleasure of your company. My name was printed beneath my parents, not as a household, individually. That detail mattered. It was the first acknowledgement, on paper, that something had shifted. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the envelope longer than necessary. Not because I didn't know how I felt, but because I wanted to be honest with myself about why. This wasn't reconciliation. It was optics. A wedding is a public narrative. Who shows up? Who sits where? Who smiles in photos that get framed and shared and remembered? My absence would be noticed. And noticed things invite questions. My mother called that evening. Her tone was lighter than it had been in months, almost careful. "Did you get the invitation?" "I did," I said. "We'd really like you there," she said. "It would mean a lot to Caleb." She didn't say, "to us." "Progress," I supposed. "I haven't decided," I replied. There was a pause. "We don't want things to be awkward." I smiled to myself. "Then don't make them that way," she exhaled. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "And I also know what you don't mean." Silence. She changed tactics. "Your father's been under a lot of stress." "I'm sure," I replied. "This wedding is important," she continued. "It's a fresh start." "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer. That night, Lauren texted me. "I hope you'll come. No pressure. Just wanted you to know I'd like you there." That one felt different. Not strategic. Not rehearsed. "Honest," I replied the next morning. "I'll come, but on my terms." She responded almost immediately. "Of course." The weeks leading up to the wedding were strangely quiet. No more calls about the business, no passive-aggressive messages, no guilt disguised as concern. They were busy managing appearances, and I was busy watching patterns. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Denise emailed me something unexpected. "Your father tried to open a new line of credit." I frowned. "Already?" "He was declined," she added. "The prior restructuring flagged him as high risk." I leaned back in my chair. Some lessons take longer to land. The wedding took place in late April at a restored barn outside Knoxville. White flowers, string lights, carefully curated rustic elegance. I arrived alone. My mother saw me immediately. Her smile froze for half a second before smoothing back into place. "Rachel," she said, hugging me stiffly, "you made it." "I said I would," I replied. Caleb hugged me more tightly. Nervous energy, relief, something like gratitude flickering behind his eyes. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "So am I replied, and meant it. The ceremony was beautiful. Lauren radiant. Caleb overwhelmed in the way people are when something real finally happens to them. I watched from my seat and felt something unexpected. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't pretending anymore. At the reception, my parents placed me at a table near the back. Not hidden, not central. Neutral, I preferred it. Midway through dinner, my father stood to give a toast. He talked about family, about legacy, about how proud he was of the man Caleb had become. Then he said something that made the room go still. "We've learned a lot this past year," he said. "About listening, about letting go, about respecting independence." My mother nodded beside him. It was an apology adjacent to accountability, carefully worded, public enough to be useful. I didn't react. After the toast, an older woman approached my table, a friend of my grandmother's. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you." I swallowed once. "Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "She always said you'd be the one who knew when to walk away." I smiled. She knew me well. Later that evening, my mother cornered me near the bar. "We've been thinking," she said. "After the wedding, maybe we could have dinner. Just us." I met her eyes. "We'll see," I said. She frowned slightly. "That's not a yes. It's not a no either," I replied. "It's honest." She didn't like that, but she accepted it. As I drove back to my hotel that night, I realized something important. The wedding hadn't pulled me back in. It had confirmed my distance. I could show up without surrendering myself. I could attend without absorbing responsibility that wasn't mine, and they could feel that shift, even if they didn't have words for it. That was the real power reversal. Not confrontation, not punishment, but presence without permission. 2 days later, Denise called again. "They're done trying," she said. "The bank made it clear." I looked out the window at the city lights. "Good." She paused. "You handled this well." "I handled it differently," I replied. And that difference had changed everything. Because once you stop being the safety net, people are forced to learn how to stand. Or fall. And either way, it's no longer your job to catch them. The weeks after the wedding felt strangely weightless, not celebratory, not sad, just quiet in a way that let me hear myself think again. I hadn't realized how much of my adult life had been shaped by anticipation, waiting for the next request, the next subtle expectation, the next moment where being reasonable would cost me something I hadn't agreed to give. That noise was gone now. I went back to work fully present. I noticed how often I'd been carrying tension in my shoulders without knowing why. I slept better. I stopped checking my phone during meetings. I stopped bracing for emotional impact that never came. And then, just as predictably as before, something changed. Not in my life, in theirs. I heard about it from Lauren. She called one evening in early May, her voice careful but not guarded. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling," she said. "It is," I replied. She hesitated. "Things are tense here." I waited. "Your parents are arguing a lot," she continued. "About money, about decisions, about what comes next." I leaned back against the couch. "I'm not surprised. They don't agree on how much help Caleb should get," she said. "Or how long." There it was. Without me absorbing pressure quietly, it had nowhere to go but sideways. Lauren lowered her voice. "Your mom keeps saying everything would be easier if you were closer." I smiled faintly. "Closer geographically or emotionally?" There was a pause. "Both." "I'm not coming back," I said gently. "I know," she replied. "I just wanted you to know. I see it now." That mattered more than she probably realized. A week later, my father emailed me again. No subject line, just a paragraph. He wrote about how hard it was watching the business shrink, about feeling like he'd failed my grandmother, about not knowing how to ask for help without feeling weak. He didn't ask me for anything. He didn't apologize either. He ended with one sentence. "I don't know how to fix what I broke." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the email. Not because I was angry, because I wasn't responsible for his repair. That was the lesson I kept learning, over and over, from different angles. Repair belongs to the person who caused the damage. Later that month, something unexpected happened at work. My director asked me to take over a struggling project. High visibility, tight deadline. A team that had burned through 2 managers already. I said yes, without hesitation. As I walked back to my desk, it hit me. A year ago, I would have paused. I would have worried about availability, about what my parents might need, about whether I'd still be able to fly home at short notice. Now, none of that crossed my mind. Freedom isn't loud, it's efficient. The project went well, better than expected. The team stabilized. We delivered on time. At the review meeting, my director said something that stuck. "You're calm under pressure," she said. "You don't over-explain. You just act." I nodded. "I've had practice." She smiled, not knowing how literal that was. In June, my mother tried again. This time, it was subtle. She mailed me a box. Inside were old photos, childhood drawings, school certificates, a scrapbook she'd started and never finished, a reminder, an anchor. I held the box for a long moment before setting it on the floor. Then I called Denise. "Is there anything legally tying me back now?" I asked. She laughed softly. "No, you're completely clear." "Good," I said. That night, I put the box in my closet and closed the door. Not to reject my past, to stop letting it dictate my future. 2 weeks later, Caleb calls. Not defensive, not scripted. "Tired. I didn't realize how much you were carrying," he said quietly. I didn't respond right away. "I thought you were just strong," he continued. "I didn't see the cost." I exhaled slowly. Most people don't. "I don't know how to be in the middle," he said. "You don't have to be," I replied. "Just be honest." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm trying." "I know," I said. And I meant it. That conversation didn't fix anything, but it shifted something small. And small shifts matter. By July, the narrative had changed again. People stopped asking why I'd stepped away. They started asking how I'd known to. That was the part my parents hadn't anticipated. Silence had protected them for years. Distance was exposing them now. I didn't correct stories. I didn't offer my version. I lived. And that turned out to be the most unsettling response of all. Because when you stop playing your role in someone else's script, the story keeps going, just without you. And for the first time, that wasn't a loss. It was relief. As summer settled in, I realized something important. The power hadn't shifted because I took it. It shifted because I stopped giving it away. And that kind of change doesn't announce itself. It just becomes permanent. By August, the Business Journal in Knoxville ran a small article, not a feature, not a headline. A brief note about Whitmore Grounds and Design restructuring again. Downsizing operations. Selling off 2 service routes. Refocusing on residential contracts only. It was written in neutral language. No blame, no drama. But I knew how to read between lines like that. This wasn't strategy. This was survival. I didn't send the article to anyone. I didn't comment. I didn't forward it to Denise. I read it once, closed the tab, and went back to work. That was the difference now. Their instability no longer rearranged my day. 2 weeks later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But avoidance wasn't my boundary. Choice was. "Rachel," she said, and her voice sounded older, not weaker, just stripped of polish. "We're thinking of selling the house." I leaned against the counter and waited. "It's too much," she continued. "The upkeep, the memories, everything. The house again." The thing she'd clung to as proof that nothing had changed. "I see," I said. She cleared her throat. "Your father thinks it might be easier if we moved somewhere smaller, closer to town." I let the silence sit. "Do you have a question?" I asked. She hesitated. "We wanted to know how you'd feel about it." There it was. Not permission. Validation. "I don't have feelings about it," I said. "It's your house." Her breath hitched. "It was your grandmother's." "Yes," I said. "And you made decisions about it without me. I respected that." Another pause. "I was hoping you'd say it was okay," she admitted. I closed my eyes. "It doesn't need my approval," I said. "That's the point." She didn't respond for a long moment. Then quietly, "I don't know how to talk to you anymore." I felt something soften in my chest. Not enough to move me. Enough to understand. "You can talk to me like an adult," I said. "Without expectations." She exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to do that." "I know," I replied. We hung up shortly after. Not tense. Not warm. Just unfinished. Later that week, Denise called with an update. "The company's accountant reached out," she said. "They're cleaning up old documentation, making sure nothing else ties back to you." "That's good," I said. "It is," she agreed. "But it also tells me something." "What?" I asked. "They're preparing for a sale. Or a shutdown." I looked out the window at the late summer light. "Either way, it's not my concern." She paused. "You've handled this with a lot of restraint." "I've had practice being quiet," I said. This time, it was intentional. That weekend, Lauren invited me to lunch. Just us. No agenda, no pretense. We sat at a small place downtown, sunlight filtering through the windows. "I didn't realize how much pressure was always there," she said after a while. "Until it landed on me." I nodded. "It doesn't disappear. It transfers." She stirred her drink. "Caleb is trying, but he's exhausted." "I know," I said. She looked at me carefully. "Do you ever feel guilty?" I considered the question. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But then I remind myself, guilt is often just grief wearing a different mask." She smiled faintly. "That's accurate." As we stood to leave, she hesitated. "I hope you don't disappear completely." I met her eyes. "I won't. I'm just not available in the same way." She nodded. "That makes sense." September arrived with cooler mornings and sharper clarity. My parents listed the house. It didn't sell immediately. Then it did. Quietly, below asking. That detail reached me through a neighbor, not through them. I didn't react. Selling the house didn't erase what had happened. It simply confirmed it. A month later, Caleb called. "Dad's closing the business at the end of the year," he said. I sat down. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I don't know," he replied. "I thought taking over meant stability." "It rarely does," I said. He sighed. "I keep thinking about what you said, about choice." "Choice is uncomfortable," I said, "but it's honest." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't think they ever planned for you to say no." "No," I agreed. "They planned for me to absorb it." That call ended without drama, just awareness. By the time fall arrived, something fundamental had changed. Not in my family. In me. I stopped narrating my decisions to myself, stopped anticipating reactions, stopped rehearsing explanations. I trusted my choices the way I'd always trusted my work, with evidence, with clarity, with follow-through. And then, one evening in October, I received a message that surprised me from my mother. Not a request, not a complaint, a statement. I'm starting therapy. I stared at the screen. Then I typed back, I hope it helps. She replied a few minutes later, I think I'm starting to see things I didn't want to see. I set the phone down and didn't respond, not because it wasn't meaningful, because it wasn't mine to manage. Growth doesn't require an audience, and accountability doesn't need applause. As the leaves began to turn, I realized something important. They were finally facing the consequences they deferred by leaning on me, not because I forced them, because I stopped standing between them and reality. And reality, unlike family narratives, doesn't adjust itself to protect anyone. It just shows up, consistently, relentlessly, fairly. I went to bed that night knowing the next chapter wouldn't be about loss. It would be about what happens when the dust finally settles, when no one is scrambling anymore, when silence becomes honest, and choices, once reclaimed, don't ask to be returned. The business closed in November, not with an announcement, not with a farewell email to clients or a thank you post online. Just a quiet removal of the company listing from Google Maps and a handwritten sign taped inside the office window. Closed, no explanation. I learned about it from a former employee who recognized my name when I placed an order at a local nursery for a personal project. Your dad used to run Whitmore Grounds, he said carefully. I worked there for a bit. I nodded. Past tense, I said. He hesitated. It ended rough. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it in the way you're sorry about weather. Acknowledging, not responsible. That was when it hit me. They weren't talking about me anymore. Not in anger, not in accusation, not even in blame. They were too busy surviving the consequences of choices they could no longer outsource. For years, I had been the quiet buffer, the competent one, the unspoken solution. When things got tight, they leaned. When decisions felt risky, they offloaded. When discomfort surfaced, they reframed. Without me there, the system collapsed inward, not dramatically, inevitably. Thanksgiving came again. This time, I wasn't invited. And this time, I didn't notice until the day passed. I spent the holiday with friends from work. No assigned roles, no history to manage, no expectations disguised as tradition. At one point, someone asked me about my family. I said, they're fine. And that was enough. In early December, Caleb came to Denver. He didn't tell our parents. He called me from the airport. I don't need anything, he said quickly, as if he needed to clarify that up front. I just needed to get out of the house. We met for coffee. He looked thinner, tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. They sold everything, he said. The trucks, the equipment, even some of Grandma's old things. I nodded. They're quiet now, he added. Not angry, just smaller. I watched him stir his cup without drinking. And you? He smiled weakly. I don't know who I am without the plan. I considered that. You get to find out, I said. He looked at me. Really looked. How did you do it? By letting myself disappoint them, I replied, and surviving it. He exhaled slowly. I don't think I was ever allowed to do that. I know, I said. We walked for a while after. No advice, no fixing. Just space. Before he left, he said something that stayed with me. They don't talk about you like they used to. I raised an eyebrow. How did they talk about me? As a problem to solve, he said. Now they don't mention you at all. I nodded. That wasn't erasure. That was acceptance. December ended quietly. No holiday cards, no emotional check-ins, no passive-aggressive messages framed as concern, just silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. In January, I received a forwarded email from Denise. Just an FYI. Your father tried to reopen a dormant LLC under a different name. It didn't clear underwriting. I stared at the message, then laughed softly. Some habits die hard. But even that attempt wasn't about me anymore. It was about control he no longer had anywhere else to put. By February, my life had fully recentered. Work expanded. I was asked to mentor a new hire. I joined a professional board I'd previously declined because travel conflicted with family obligations. I stopped explaining myself, stopped asking for permission I didn't need. One night, while reorganizing my office, I found the folder Denise had given me months earlier. Copies of documents, timelines, emails, the paper trail of everything I'd stepped away from. I considered shredding it, then I didn't. I labeled it simply closed because that's what it was. In March, my mother sent a text. Just one line. I think I understand now why you left. I stared at the screen. Then I typed back. I hope that understanding brings you peace. She didn't reply, and I didn't wait for one. That was the final shift. The moment I stopped checking for acknowledgement, stopped hoping for validation, stopped needing them to see me the way I finally saw myself. I wasn't difficult. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't cold. I had been controlled. And once that control was gone, everything else rearranged itself naturally. I didn't win anything from my family. I didn't take property. I didn't take money. I didn't take revenge. I took my agency. And that changed the power dynamic more completely than any confrontation ever could. By the time spring returned, I no longer measured my life against theirs. I measured it against my own capacity to choose, to stay, to leave, to speak, to be silent. That was the inheritance I claimed, not because they gave it to me, but because I stopped letting them take it. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something simple and unshakable. The moment they stopped looking at me for solutions was the moment I finally became free. And freedom, once felt, doesn't ask you to go back. It only asks you to keep choosing it. By April, my calendar looked different. Not emptier, fuller. Just not with family obligations disguised as emergencies. I traveled for work without guilt, accepted invitations without calculating how quickly I could leave. I noticed how often people around me assumed I had autonomy and trusted me with it. No one questioned my availability. No one framed my boundaries as betrayal. That contrast still startled me. One afternoon, while reviewing quarterly goals with my director, she asked a simple question. Where do you want this to go? She meant my career, but my mind went somewhere else first. I thought about all the years I'd made decisions by subtraction. What I could do without causing tension. What I could delay to avoid disappointment. What I could shoulder quietly so others didn't have to adjust. I want to build something that doesn't rely on my self-erasure, I said. She smiled. That's specific. It's earned, I replied. That summer, I was promoted. Not with fanfare, with trust. More authority, more discretion, less oversight. The kind of advancement that assumes competence rather than proving it. When the announcement went out internally, my phone didn't light up with family messages, and for the first time, that absence felt like alignment. In June, I bought a small cabin in the foothills outside Boulder. Nothing extravagant, just enough space to breathe. A place that belonged to me, without shared narratives or inherited expectations. The closing process was smooth. No co-signers, no hidden guarantees, just my name. I stood in the empty living room on move-in day and felt something settle. This was mine. Not because someone left it to me, because I chose it. Caleb visited once that summer. He stayed a weekend, helped me paint, asked questions about work, about Denver, about what life looked like without a script. I didn't know you could live this quietly, he said one evening, standing on the deck as the sun dipped behind the mountains. It's loud at first, I said. Then it gets honest. He nodded. He didn't ask for help. That mattered. In August, my mother called, not to ask for anything, to tell me she'd gone back to school part-time. Counseling certification, something she'd wanted to do years ago and never allowed herself. I think I was afraid of who I'd be if I stopped managing everyone else, she said. I believed her. But belief didn't require proximity anymore. That's brave, I said. She hesitated. I don't expect us to be close. I know, I replied. We don't have to define it. She exhaled. Thank you for not punishing me. I closed my eyes. I didn't leave to punish anyone. That was true. I left to survive. In September, a colleague asked me to speak at a leadership panel. I talked about risk, about boundaries, about how saying no early is kinder than saying yes until you break. Afterward, a woman in her late 50s approached me. "I wish I'd learned that sooner," she said. "So do I replied. Fall returned. The anniversary of the conversation at my parents' kitchen island passed without ceremony. No spiral, no replay. Just another day. I'd stopped marking time by wounds. In October, I cleaned out the last box from my old life. The scrapbook my mother had sent, the childhood drawings, the carefully curated memories. I kept some. Let others go. Memory isn't obligation. It's context. That Thanksgiving, I hosted again. Different faces, new stories. A table built on choice rather than tradition. Someone raised a glass and said, "I'm thankful for this group." So was I. Later that night, alone in the quiet, I thought about revenge. How often people confuse it with justice. I hadn't set out to hurt anyone. I hadn't exposed secrets or burned bridges. I'd done something far less dramatic. I'd stopped playing my part, and the system that depended on my participation had recalibrated accordingly. That was the twist no one had planned for. In December, my father sent a card. No message, just his name. I placed it in a drawer with the rest of the past and closed it gently. Not in anger, in acceptance. The life that grew in the space I left didn't look like revenge. It looked like ownership of time, of choice, of self. And that was the only ending that mattered. As the year closed, I knew one thing with certainty. Walking away didn't make me smaller. It made room. And what filled that room was something no one could take from me again. Because it was built on consent, not control. Not silence, consent. And once you learn the difference, you never unlearn it. The request came quietly, not through my mother, not through my father, through a lawyer. The envelope arrived in early January, thin and unremarkable, the return address unfamiliar. I almost tossed it aside with the junk mail, until I saw my name typed cleanly on the front. No nickname, no flourish, just Rachel Whitmore. Inside was a letter written in careful, neutral language. My parents were revising their estate plan again. They wanted to include me, not fully, not equal, but symbolically, a modest allocation. A clause acknowledging me as their daughter. A request for my signature confirming receipt and consent. I sat at my dining table and read the letter twice. This wasn't reconciliation. It was reputation management. Their accountant had advised it, I would later learn. Their therapist may have nudged it. Or maybe they'd simply realized that completely cutting me out hadn't brought the peace they expected. Including me now wasn't generosity. It was damage control. I called Denise. She didn't sound surprised. "This happens," she said, "when people realize exclusion creates more questions than inclusion." "What happens if I sign?" I asked. "You legitimize the structure," she replied. "You also reopen a door you worked very hard to close." "And if I don't?" She paused. "Then nothing changes. Except they'll have to sit with it." I thanked her and hung up. That night, I didn't rush to decide. I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching snow settle on the street below. I thought about the younger version of myself, who would have leapt at this, who would have seen it as proof of love returning, of belonging restored. I wasn't her anymore. 2 days later, my mother called. "I assume you received the letter," she said. "I did," I replied. "We thought it might be a step forward," she said carefully. "For who?" I asked. She hesitated. "For all of us." I closed my eyes briefly. "It doesn't feel that way to me." She sounded tired. What would? That was a genuine question, and it deserved an honest answer. "Nothing that involves paperwork," I said. "Nothing that asked me to validate a structure I didn't help create." She was quiet for a long time. "I wish we'd done things differently," she said finally. "I know," I replied, "but wishing doesn't undo." "So that's it?" she asked. "You won't sign?" "No," I said gently. "I won't." Her breath caught. "You're choosing distance." "I'm choosing clarity," I said. "Distance is just the result." She didn't argue. That was new. A week later, I mailed the letter back unsigned. No explanation attached. Just the documents. Returned exactly as they'd been sent. The lawyer acknowledged receipt. That was the end of it. No escalation. No retaliation. Just finality. In February, Caleb called. "They told me you said no," he said. "Yes," I replied. I think that was the right call," he admitted. I smiled softly. "I'm glad you see that. They're different now," he added. Not better, just aware. That's their work, I said. Yeah, he agreed. I'm trying to do mine too. That conversation ended with mutual understanding, not obligation. It felt like progress without pressure. As winter faded, I noticed something else. I no longer felt the urge to explain my family history to new people. It had stopped being the frame through which I understood myself. It was just a chapter, one that informed me, not defined me. The last time I saw my parents that year was at my grandmother's gravesite in April, an unplanned overlap. We nodded, exchanged a few polite words. No tension, no performance, just acknowledgement. As we walked back to our cars, my father stopped. "I'm proud of you," he said. Not loudly, not publicly, just once. I met his eyes. I know. And for the first time, that was enough. I drove away, feeling something close to closure. Not because everything had been resolved, but because nothing was unresolved anymore. They had made their choices. I had made mine. And neither required permission from the other. That was the last time they asked me back into a structure that didn't fit. And the last time I needed to say no. Because after that, my life was no longer a reaction. It was a direction, and I was finally the one setting it. The truth is, nothing dramatic marked the end. No final argument. No door slammed hard enough to echo. No moment where anyone declared victory or defeat. The story didn't end with a bang. It ended with alignment. By the time summer returned, my life had settled into a rhythm that didn't require defense. Mornings that began without dread. Evenings that didn't carry emotional residue from conversations I'd had to rehearse in advance. Weekends that belonged to me, not to expectations inherited and never questioned. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, because there was no shoe anymore. I hadn't taken money from my family. I hadn't taken property or leverage or revenge in the way people usually imagine it. What I took was quieter. I took my name off documents that never should have held it. I took my silence back from people who benefited from it. I took my time away from roles I hadn't consented to. And in doing so, I took something far more valuable than inheritance. I took authorship. There were moments, of course, when the old reflex tried to return. A pang of guilt when my mother sounded lonely on the phone. A flicker of responsibility when Caleb mentioned uncertainty. A brief instinct to smooth things over, to offer reassurance I wasn't asked to give. But those moments passed more quickly now, because I understood the difference between compassion and compliance. Compassion allows you to care without surrendering yourself. Compliance requires you to disappear to keep others comfortable. I had done enough disappearing for one lifetime. That fall, I was asked to speak again, this time at a regional conference. The topic was leadership under pressure. I talked about systems, about incentives, about how dysfunction often survives not because it's powerful, but because it's convenient. Afterward, a woman in her 60s approached me. She held my arm gently, like someone who had learned to ask permission with her body before her words. "I spent 40 years being the reasonable one," she said. "No one ever thanked me for it." I met her eyes. "You don't have to spend the next 10. She nodded slowly, as if filing the thought away for later. That was when I realized why stories like mine matter. Not because they offer a fantasy of payback, but because they offer permission. Permission to stop negotiating your worth. Permission to let people be disappointed. Permission to choose yourself without narrating it as selfishness. My parents are still alive, still complicated, still learning in their own uneven way. Caleb is building a life that looks less like obligation and more like intention. Slowly, awkwardly, honestly. We speak sometimes, not often, not performatively, enough. And that's the part that surprises people when I tell this story. There is no villain monologue at the end, no courtroom triumph, no moment where everyone suddenly understands and apologizes perfectly. Real life doesn't do that. What it does do is this. It reveals. It reveals who benefits from your silence. It reveals who panics when you stop explaining. It reveals which relationships survive without leverage. And most importantly, it reveals who you become when you are no longer trying to be palatable. I am not estranged. I am not reconciled. I am autonomous. That is the state I worked for. That is the state I protect. If you are listening to this and recognizing pieces of yourself in it, I want to say something plainly, without drama or softness. You do not owe access to people who only respect you when you are useful. You do not owe gratitude for conditional love. You do not owe silence to preserve someone else's comfort. Sometimes the most powerful act of revenge is not exposure, it is exit. And sometimes the greatest inheritance is not what you receive. It is what you refuse to carry any longer. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or quietly controlled by the people who were supposed to protect you, you're not alone. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I read them. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, grounded in real choices and real consequences, subscribe and stay. Some endings are loud. The ones that change your life forever are usually quiet. This was mine.